You know, one of the most beautiful things about our religion, something that a lot of people don't even realize, is that the Qur'an encourages questions. It actually celebrates people who ask. For instance, in one of the most profound surahs of the Qur'an, Allah says, "Indeed, in Yusuf and his brothers, there are many signs for those who ask questions." Allah could have said for those who believe or for those who remember, but he chose to say for those who ask questions. That's remarkable. It means Islam doesn't want blind followers. It wants thoughtful believers. People who inquire, reflect, and come to conviction through understanding, not through pressure or culture. You know, even during the time of the Prophet, people would come and ask him all sorts of questions about life, about faith, about law, about the unseen, and Allah didn't condemn them for it. In fact, he honored their curiosity by making their questions part of the Qur'an itself. Every time you read, they ask you about Yasalunaka an. You're reading a record of someone who asked a question, and Allah valued that moment enough to preserve it forever in his book. Think about that. Someone asked about alcohol and gambling, someone asked about the sacred months, someone asked about the soul, and Allah didn't just reveal the answers. He first said, "They ask you," before giving the response. He wanted that question to be acknowledged. Because in Islam, asking is noble. Seeking understanding is worship. But then there's another ayah that seems, at first glance, to say the opposite. Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, "Do you intend to ask your messenger as Musa was asked before? Whoever replaces faith with disbelief has certainly strayed from the straight path." That sounds like a warning. Almost as if Allah is saying, don't you dare question your prophet the way Musa was questioned. So, which is it? On one hand, the Qur'an praises questions, and on the other, it seems to condemn them. How do we make sense of that? The answer lies in context. Every ayah of the Qur'an lives within a larger conversation. And if we look closely, this warning was revealed during a discussion about Bani Israel, the Israelites, and the way they questioned Musa. See, the issue wasn't that they asked questions. The issue was how they asked and why they asked. You see, there are two kinds of questions. There's the sincere question, asked by someone who truly wants to understand, who's seeking guidance, who's wrestling with confusion and trying to find clarity. And then there's the sarcastic, mocking question, asked not to learn, but to challenge, to ridicule, or to avoid responsibility. Let me give you an example from the classroom. As a teacher, you can always tell the difference between a student who genuinely wants to learn and one who just wants to make a joke out of everything. One asks with humility, "I'm confused, can you please explain this?" The other asks, "Oh, so you're saying that actually works?" Same format, both are questions, but one comes from curiosity, the other from arrogance. The Qur'an treats questions the same way. It celebrates sincere inquiry but warns against condescending challenge. When Allah says, "Are you intending to ask your messenger like Musa was asked before?" He's referring to the kind of questions Bani Israel asked after witnessing miracles with their own eyes. They saw the sea split. They saw water gush out of stone. They saw food descend from the sky. There was no room left for doubt. But still, they questioned, not because they needed answers, but because they didn't want to submit. And that's the key difference. Some people ask to understand. Others ask to resist. So when Allah warns us not to question the Prophet like Musa was questioned, he's not shutting the door to curiosity. He's shutting the door to arrogance. Now, in our times, we face all kinds of questions about Islam. People ask about violence, about women's rights, about slavery, about freedom, about why Islam says this or that. And often, Muslims, especially young ones in college, get bombarded with these questions. And you might think if we just had all the perfect answers, people would believe. But here's the thing, that's not true. There are root questions and there are branch questions. Root questions are the big ones. Is there a God? Is the Qur'an truly from him? Is Muhammad really his messenger? Is there life after death? These are the foundations. When these roots are firm, everything else makes sense. Even if you don't have every answer, your heart is grounded. Then there are the branch questions, the ones about social issues, laws, or modern criticism. Those are valid too, but they'll never be satisfying if the roots aren't firm. You can spend hours explaining one branch after another, Islam and women, Islam and politics, Islam and war, but if the listener hasn't come to terms with whether this message is truly divine, they'll keep growing new doubts. Cut one branch, two more grow. But if someone's roots are strong, if they've sincerely come to believe, yes, there is a creator and this is his word, then even when they don't understand everything, they can trust that Allah knows and they don't. They can say, Allahue, and they find peace in that. The real danger isn't asking. The danger is asking with the wrong intention, asking not to learn but to challenge. That's what Allah warned against. In fact, even the wording of that verse is amazing. Are you intending to ask? Allah didn't say, are you asking? He said, are you intending? Meaning, even before the words come out, he's addressing the thought, the attitude behind the question. Today, many Muslims struggle silently with questions about faith, punishment, destiny, morality, and more. But our community has sometimes made it taboo to ask. If you ask, people panic or accuse you of doubt, and because of that, some people never ask. They bottle their confusion until it becomes distance from Allah. But Allah never told us to stay silent. He told us to ask sincerely, respectfully, humbly, the way the angels asked when Allah told them about creating Adam. They said, will you place upon the earth one who causes corruption and sheds blood? And Allah didn't condemn them for that question. He answered them, because the question came from curiosity, not arrogance. So yes, Islam encourages questions, but it teaches us how to ask and why to ask. The tone, the attitude, the sincerity, all of that matters. And that's where humility comes in. You see, faith isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's not just logic. The Israelites saw clear proofs with their own eyes, yet they still rebelled, not because they lacked evidence, but because they lacked humility. Their arrogance blinded them. So when Allah reminds us of that history, He's not saying don't ask. He's saying don't be like them, don't let pride, greed, or stubbornness cover your heart, because the real barrier to faith is rarely the mind, it's the ego. And sometimes Allah humbles us by reminding us what we're made of. Does man not remember that we created him from a drop of fluid? In other words, you, the one questioning my power, you were created from something people wash off their clothes. It's not to insult us, but to bring us back to perspective, to remind us who's the creator and who's the creation. When you realize that, everything changes. You stop talking about Allah as an idea and you start talking to Allah as your master. You realize that when you discuss His words, He's not an abstract subject. He's present, hearing, witnessing. That awareness brings humility, and humility opens the door to understanding. So yes, ask your questions. Islam is not afraid of questions, but ask with sincerity. Ask with respect. Ask to grow closer to Allah, not to run away from Him. And may Allah make us among those who seek knowledge with humility, who ask for guidance with open hearts, and who are never afraid to learn, but always careful to remember who we are asking from. Ameen.